Welcome to the Haunting Hour YouTube channel. Before listening to the story, please subscribe to this channel, give a like and comment. Thank you and enjoy watching. The rusty swing set creaked in the evening breeze, its rhythmic groan a constant companion to the oppressive silence that hung over Blue Springs, Missouri. I sat slumped on a warm wooden bench, watching the vibrant hues of orange and pink bleed from the sky. A strange unease gnawed at me, a prickling sensation that crawled beneath my skin and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Another restless night, huh? John's voice startled me. He leaned against the opposite end of the bench, his face obscured by the fading light. We'd grown up in this sleepy town, the playground our shared childhood stomping ground. Now, on the cusp of leaving for college in Chicago, the swing set felt more like a relic of simpler times. Yeah, I mumbled, unable to shake the unsettling feeling. Like someone's watching. John scoffed. Probably Mrs. Henderson. She has a sixth sense for teenagers up to no good, even in broad daylight. Mrs. Henderson, our perpetually suspicious neighbor, often patrolled her porch like a hawk, her beady eyes scrutinizing every move we made. But something felt different this time. It wasn't Mrs. Henderson's judgmental gaze. It was a deeper, primal sense of being observed. "There is no one here," John said, his voice laced with a hint of amusement. "Just reminiscing about old times, right before you abandoned this one-horse town for the big city." I forced a smile. Something like that. We sat in silence for a moment, the creaking swing competing with the chirping crickets in the gathering darkness. "You sure you don't want to reconsider Chicago?" John asked, his voice softening. "We could find a place together." The thought of staying in Blue Springs, with its suffocating small-town life, sent a shiver down my spine. Chicago held the promise of anonymity, a fresh start, anything but this stifling feeling of being trapped. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "It's time for something new." As if on cue, a cold gust of wind whipped through the park, rustling the leaves and sending a loose piece of paper skittering across the ground. It landed at my feet, its surface stained with a dark brown splatter that sent a jolt of fear through me. It wasn't dirt. It was blood. I stared at the stain, my stomach churning. The unease that had been simmering within me suddenly exploded into full-blown dread. Blue Springs might have been small, but something sinister lurked beneath its quaint facade, and I had a feeling it wasn't done with me yet. The image of the blood-stained paper clung to me like a bad omen. Sleep was a stranger that night, my mind plagued by fleeting visions of shadowed figures and unseen eyes. The next morning, the oppressive quiet of Blue Springs seemed to mock my unease. "You all right?" John asked, his brow furrowed with concern as he watched me down a lukewarm cup of coffee. "You haven't touched your eggs." My throat felt too tight to swallow. I pushed the plate away, the fear lingering like a bad taste in my mouth. "Just a bad dream," I mumbled, avoiding his gaze. "About leaving?" I hesitated. John was my closest friend, but this felt different. Something I couldn't explain. "No," I finally said. "About the park." His concern deepened. "The blood? You think it means anything?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling a wave of helplessness wash over me. "But something doesn't feel right." Deciding to clear my head, we set off for a hike in the familiar woods bordering our town. The scent of pine needles and damp earth filled the air, a comforting aroma that usually soothed my anxieties. But today the forest felt different. An unnatural stillness hung heavy, broken only by the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. Suddenly, a sharp pain lanced through my stomach, doubling me over. I gasped, clutching my gut. John rushed to my side, his face etched with worry. "What's wrong?" he exclaimed, his voice laced with panic. "I don't know," I choked out, sweat beading on my forehead. The pain was excruciating, a vise tightening around my insides. My vision blurred to the once familiar surroundings dissolving into a swirling kaleidoscope of colors. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the damp forest floor, John's face hovering above me, concern etched on his features. "Whoa, easy there," he said, his voice a comforting rumble. "You fainted. What happened?" My stomach still felt tender, a dull ache lingering. But the overwhelming pain was gone. I don't know," I mumbled, pushing myself to sit up. Just then, a twig snapped in the distance. We both froze, eyes scanning the dense foliage for the source of the sound. But the woods remained silent, the only movement the gentle sway of leaves in the breeze. "Probably just a deer," John ventured, his voice attempting to sound nonchalant, but a tremor betrayed his worry. A shiver ran down my spine. It didn't feel like a deer. It felt watched. We decided to return home, my unease escalating with each step. Reaching the edge of the woods, I glanced back. There, amidst the dense foliage, I caught a glimpse of a pair of eyes gleaming in the fading light. Yellow eyes, cold and predatory. My breath hitched in my throat. It was gone in a flash, but the memory of those eyes burned into my mind, a terrifying confirmation of my worst fears. Back at John's house, exhaustion finally overtook me. As I drifted off to sleep, an image flickered in my mind. A creature, tall and skeletal, with glowing yellow eyes and a predatory grin. It was a memory, both frightening and strangely familiar. A distant memory of a childhood party, a dare gone wrong, and a creature they called the Watcher. Sleep brought no solace. The image of the creature, the Watcher, haunted my dreams, a chilling reminder of the repressed memory that had surfaced in the woods. The next morning, determined to understand what was happening, I dragged John to the library, a place of solace filled with the scent of aged paper and forgotten stories. "You think the answer to some monster in the woods is in a book?" John chuckled, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Stranger things have happened," I retorted, hoping to sound more confident than I felt. We delved into the dusty stacks of local history books, the musty scent filling our lungs as we turned brittle pages. Hours melted away as we sifted through tales of pioneers and forgotten settlements. Frustration gnawed at me. None of it seemed to offer any clues about the Watcher or the blood-stained paper. "Maybe you just dreamed it all up," John suggested, a hint of skepticism in his voice. I slammed the book shut, frustration bubbling over. "No, John. It's real. And that look in those eyes, I've seen it before." My outburst startled him. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. "Remember that party in the woods when we were kids? The one with the stupid dares?" John's face paled slightly. "The one where everyone got sick afterwards?" "Yes," I said, a chill running down my spine. "And that weird feeling we all had, like we were being watched." John hesitated. "Yeah," he admitted reluctantly. "But we were just kids. Probably just spooked ourselves after Emily's dare." Emily, the fearless leader of our childhood group, had dared us to spend the night in the abandoned cabin deep in the woods. That night, a sense of dread had permeated the air, a prickling sensation of being observed. We had all left the cabin in the middle of the night, violently ill and filled with a nameless fear. "Maybe it wasn't just our imaginations this time either," I insisted. "That's why I feel so familiar with it." John remained silent, his gaze flickering between me and the towering shelves of books. An idea struck me. "Let's look up that cabin," I said, rushing towards the librarian's desk. Maybe there's something about it in the local archives. The librarian, a stern woman with spectacles perched on her nose, stared at us with an air of disapproval as she sifted through dusty files. Finally, she retrieved a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with spidery handwriting. Skimming the content, she found the entry we needed. "The old hermit's cabin," she muttered, her voice raspy. "Abandoned after the disappearance of its owner, Ezekiel Crow, in 1947. Local legend has it, dark rituals, forbidden practices." A cold dread settled in my stomach. Rituals. Crow. This was exactly what I was looking for, but the implications sent shivers down my spine. Anything about any creatures? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The librarian shook her head, her expression grim. Nothing specific. But the townsfolk, they avoided that place like the plague. John's eyes met mine, a mixture of fear and determination reflected in them. We had stumbled upon something far bigger than a simple town legend. Something sinister lurked in the woods, and it seemed I was inexplicably connected to it. Leaving the library, a heavy weight settled on my shoulders. I knew I couldn't ignore this anymore. I had to find out what the Watcher was and how it was connected to me. But a tiny voice at the back of my mind whispered a frightening question. Was it already too late? Days turned into a blur of research and growing unease. John, initially skeptical, became increasingly worried by the changes in me. My appetite dwindled, replaced by a constant low-grade nausea. Fatigue clung to me like a shroud, and the nightmares of the creature intensified, vivid and unsettling. "You're scaring the living daylights out of me here," John finally said, his voice laced with concern as I pored over the dusty pages of an old grimoire I discovered in a hidden corner of the library. "Sorry," I mumbled, my eyes glued to the faded symbols and archaic text. "It's just, something feels different. Inside me." I held up a page with a crude illustration of a skeletal figure with glowing eyes, its resemblance to the Watcher uncanny. Beneath it, cryptic symbols seemed to writhe and twist, defying translation. "Look at this," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It's almost identical." John leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It could be just a coincidence. There are probably lots of scary drawings in old books." "But what about the rituals?" I countered, slamming the book shut. "The descriptions, they talk about summoning, about sacrifices, about tethering a creature to the physical world." My voice trailed off, the chilling realization dawning on me. What if Emily's dare, the night spent in the cabin, had been more than just a childhood prank? What if we had unwittingly become part of some dark ritual tethered to this creature called the Watcher? John swallowed hard. "You think that's what happened that night? We summoned it." The thought sent a wave of terror through me. But it also explained the sickness, the fear that had plagued us ever since. "We need to find out more," I said, a newfound determination burning in my eyes. "There has to be a way to break the connection, a way to banish it." The grimoire offered no clear answers, only chilling descriptions of ancient pacts and the consequences of breaking them. We scoured the library, devouring any book remotely related to local history, folklore, or dark magic. Days blurred into nights, fueled by stale coffee and gnawing fear. Suddenly, a sharp pain lanced through my head, doubling me over. Images flooded my mind, swirling shadows, chanting voices, and a cold, disembodied laughter. Then, a whisper, faint but distinct, echoed inside my head. "You can't escape me," it rasped, sending shivers down my spine. "You are mine, I gasped, clutching my head as the vision subsided. John rushed to my side, his face etched with worry. "What happened?" he exclaimed, his voice frantic. "The Watcher," I choked out, the terror still clinging to me. "It spoke to me, in my mind." John's eyes widened in alarm. The fear was no longer confined to his voice. It was reflected in the pallor of his face. "We have to do something, and fast," I stated, a desperate urgency fueling my voice. Before it takes control." The weight of the threat settled heavily on us. The creature had taken notice, its influence growing stronger. The library felt like a ticking time bomb, every book a potential answer or a dead end. We had stumbled into a horrific truth, and the fight for my freedom, and perhaps our very lives, had just begun. Sleep offered no refuge, only a canvas for the Watcher's taunting presence. Grotesque visions danced in my head, punctuated by its chilling whispers. Exhaustion gnawed at me, but fear kept me tethered to wakefulness. John, his face etched with worry, brewed another pot of coffee, the bitter aroma assaulting my senses. The library had become our war room, cluttered with open books, cryptic symbols scrawled across whiteboards, and a growing sense of desperation. "There has to be something," I mumbled, pushing another dead end away. "A ritual to break the connection, a weakness to exploit." Frustration gnawed at me. Every dead end felt like a closed door, each tick of the clock an impending doom. "Maybe we're looking in the wrong place," John finally said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. He gestured towards the grimoire, the source of both terror and potential answers. "Maybe the answers aren't in local folklore or forgotten rituals." "What do you mean? What if we're not dealing with some local legend?" John pointed at a page filled with star charts and arcane symbols. What if the Watcher is something older, something more cosmic?" The idea sent a shiver down my spine. A creature beyond local legends, something tied to the very fabric of existence. It was a terrifying possibility, but it also opened up a new avenue of research. "We need to look broader," John continued, his voice gaining conviction. "Demonology, ancient texts on interdimensional beings." With renewed determination, we delved into the library's forbidden section, filled with grimoires bound in human skin and texts written in languages that twisted my tongue. The air crackled with a sense of forbidden knowledge, each turn of a page a gamble. Suddenly, my vision blurred, the room tilting around me. A sharp pang of pain lanced through my head, followed by a chillingly familiar voice. "Found something interesting, haven't you?" The Watcher's voice echoed inside my skull, laced with malicious amusement. "But knowledge comes at a price." I screamed, clutching my head as the room dissolved into a swirling vortex of shadows. John's face, etched with fear, swam in and out of focus before the darkness swallowed me whole. When I awoke, I was sprawled on the cold library floor, John kneeling beside me, his face a mask of worry. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with urgency. The throbbing in my head threatened to split me in two, but I managed a weak nod. "It's getting stronger," I croaked, my voice hoarse. "It wants to stop us from finding its weakness." "We're close," John insisted, his eyes gleaming with a newfound determination. "I found a reference, a ritual for banishing interdimensional entities. It requires specific ingredients, some rare and dangerous." My stomach clenched. Dangerous ingredients meant danger for us as well. But what choice did we have? Facing the Watcher seemed like a guaranteed death sentence. "All right," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "We find them. We do whatever it takes." The library may have become a battlefield, But it was also our only hope. We had stumbled into a horrific game, forced to play with the devil and his dark rituals. But this time, we weren't just playing for survival. We were playing for my very soul. The hunt for the ingredients had begun, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The list of ingredients for the banishing ritual read like a macabre grocery list cobbled together from nightmares. Nightshade from the abandoned greenhouse on the outskirts of town, a raven's feather plucked under a full moon, and a sliver of obsidian imbued with moonlight during a specific lunar eclipse. Each item felt impossible, a cruel joke played by a malevolent entity. "Are you sure this isn't just a trap?" I asked John, my voice laced with despair as we stared at the faded inscription in the ancient text. John, his face haggard, but resolute, shook his head. "There has to be a reason the Watcher tried to stop us from finding this. There has to be a real chance it works." Hope flickered inside me, fragile but persistent. We couldn't afford to give in to despair. Obtaining the nightshade was relatively easy, although the chilling silence of the abandoned greenhouse and the whispers of the wind through the broken panes sent shivers down my spine. The raven's feather proved harder. Sneaking out at midnight, bundled against the crisp autumn air, John and I spent hours under the watchful eye of the full moon, waiting for the opportune moment. It felt like a twisted game of hide-and-seek with a creature that could see in the dark, its unseen presence tightening my throat with each passing minute. Finally, a raven landed on a nearby branch, its obsidian eyes gleaming in the moonlight. We waited with bated breath, hearts pounding. Just as it hopped closer, oblivious to our presence, John lunged, capturing it in a swift movement. The raven squawked and struggled, its black wings flapping wildly. Guilt gnawed at me, but the desperate fight for survival quelled the voice of my conscience. The final ingredient, the obsidian imbued with moonlight during a specific eclipse, was the most daunting. The eclipse wouldn't occur for another week, and the ancient text mentioned a specific location, a desolate cliff overlooking a churning sea, notoriously treacherous during storms. "We can't wait a week," I said, my voice tight with fear. "It's getting stronger, John. I can feel it." John understood. The Watcher's presence was inescapable, a malevolent pressure pushing down on me, its whispers growing clearer, more insistent. Denial was no longer an option. This was a fight to the death, and we were desperately underprepared. "All right," John finally said, his voice filled with grim determination. "We leave tomorrow. And if something happens, you finish the ritual, no matter what." His words hung heavy in the air, a grim pact made amidst the desperation of our situation. The library, once a comforting haven of knowledge, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on us with every passing moment. Leaving town, venturing out to face the elements and who knows what else, seemed like a suicide mission. But staying put wasn't an option either. Tomorrow, we would head for the treacherous cliffs, facing a deadly storm and a creature intent on claiming me as its own. The fate of the ritual, and perhaps our very lives, hung in the balance. The climb back to the top of the cliff was a grueling trek, our bodies protesting every movement. Yet, with each step, the crushing weight of the Watcher's presence seemed to lift a little more. Reaching the top, we collapsed on the rain-soaked grass, chests heaving, lungs burning. "We did it," I finally croaked, a sense of disbelief mingling with the exhaustion. John leaned back against a rock, a weary smile gracing his lips. "We did." Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the retreating sobs of the storm and the distant cries of gulls. The ordeal had forged a new bond between us, a shared experience of terror and triumph that transcended words. What now? I asked, the question echoing in the vastness of the now calm sky. John shrugged, a wry grin etched on his face. College, I guess. But who knows, maybe this was our big adventure, and things will seem awfully tame after facing an interdimensional entity. I chuckled faintly. Tame seemed unlikely. The memory of the Watcher's chilling whispers still lingered in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness we had confronted. Maybe, I conceded, but at least we won't have to worry about creepy creatures hiding in the woods anymore. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision caught my eye. Startled, I turned my head towards the woods, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. There, nestled amidst the trees, stood a figure. Cloaked in shadow, his form was indistinct, but the pair of glowing yellow eyes that cut through the gloom were unmistakable. My heart hammered against my ribs, fear threatening to engulf me. Was it? Could it be? The figure tilted its head, a hint of amusement flickering in its eyes. Then, with a raspy chuckle that sent shivers down my spine, it spoke. Farewell. It rasped, its voice softer than before, almost grateful. Your bravery has impressed me. Perhaps next time we can play again. With that, the figure dissolved into a wisp of smoke, disappearing into the trees without a trace. This time there was no overwhelming dread, no oppressive feeling of being watched, just a chilling whisper of doubt, a seed of uncertainty planted deep within me. John followed my gaze towards the empty patch of trees, his brow furrowed in confusion. What is it? He asked, sensing my fear. I shook my head, unable to voice the terrifying possibility that hung in the air. Maybe the Watcher was truly banished. Maybe that final flicker of amusement was genuine, a grudging respect for our resilience. Or maybe it was just playing another game, a long game with a much more terrifying endgame waiting on the horizon. We gazed back at the cliffs, a silent monument to our harrowing experience. The sky, finally clear, blazed a vibrant blue. But a sliver of doubt lingered, a reminder that the lines between victory and a temporary reprieve can be blurred, and the shadows might not be as banished as they seemed. The journey to the cliffs was a blur of bone-chilling wind and relentless rain. The storm raged with a fury that mirrored the turmoil within me. The Watcher's presence was relentless, a constant buzzing in my head, its whispers filled with threats and taunts. You won't make it, it hissed, its voice slithering into my mind. This is just a delay, a futile attempt to postpone the inevitable. I gritted my teeth, pushing its voice to the back of my mind. Each step towards the cliffs felt like a step towards my own demise, but the thought of staying in town, at the Watcher's mercy, filled me with a far greater terror. We're almost there, John grunted, his voice strained against the howling wind. His face was pale and drenched, but his eyes held a steely determination. Reaching the cliff edge, we were met by a sight that took my breath away. The churning sea, whipped into a frenzy by the storm, crashed against the rocks below, sending plumes of spray skyward. The air crackled with a raw power that made me shrink back in fear. How are we going to get down there? I yelled over the roaring wind. There's a small ledge about halfway down, John shouted back, his voice barely audible. We just need to be careful. Care? There was no such thing in this storm-racked landscape. Each step down the slick, moss-covered rock face felt like a leap of faith. The wind threatened to tear me from the cliff edge, and the crashing waves seemed to mock my desperate attempt. Halfway down, I slipped, a scream tearing from my throat as I dangled precariously over the churning abyss. John, thankfully closer to solid ground, managed to secure a rope we brought and haul me back onto the narrow ledge. You all right? John yelled, his face itched with concern. I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. Just scared. Me too, he admitted, a rare vulnerability in his voice. But we can't give up now. We've come too far. He was right. There was no turning back. With renewed courage, we continued our perilous descent. Finally, soaked to bone and shivering uncontrollably, we reached the base of the cliff. The obsidian rock face shimmered in the intermittent flashes of lightning, the inscription we saw vaguely visible in the near darkness. Just then, a booming crack echoed across the sky, the eclipse beginning. We scrambled to work, John holding the raven feather over the chosen spot, while I, my hands numb and trembling, carved the ancient symbol into the obsidian with a jagged piece of rock. As the last stroke of the symbol landed, the sky glowed red, bathing the rock face in an eerie glow. The watcher's scream, a horrific cacophony of rage and pain, ripped through the air. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, the cave mouth behind the rock face pulsating with an ominous light. "It's working," John shouted, his voice barely audible over the din. "Get the last ingredient. Now." I fumbled for the vial containing the nightshade extract, its acrid scent stinging my nostrils. Just as I reached the rock face, the cave entrance erupted. A swirling vortex of shadows surged forth, coalescing into the monstrous form of the Watcher. Its glowing eyes, filled with a murderous hatred, locked onto me. "You will pay for this," it rasped, its voice echoing with a bone-chilling power. Before it could react, I smashed the vial, the foul-smelling liquid splashing across the glowing symbol. A blinding white light erupted, engulfing the cave and the creature within. The ground trembled, the wind howled like a banshee, and then an unnatural silence descended. The storm raged on, but the oppressive feeling of dread was gone. The air felt lighter, cleaner. I stumbled towards John, collapsing into this soaked embrace, both of us gasping for breath. "Did it work?" I managed to ask, my voice raspy. John looked around, awestruck. The storm seemed to be subsiding, a faint glow of sunlight peeking from behind the clouds. I think so," he stammered. We stayed on the cliff face for what felt like hours, watching as the storm dissipated, and the sun finally broke through the clouds. The ordeal had left both of us physically and emotionally drained, but a feeling of quiet triumph filled the air. Leaving the obsidian rock face behind, we began the arduous climb back up the cliff. Each step was a testament to our survival, each labored breath a victory over the darkness we had faced. As the first rays of sunlight washed over the landscape, painting the wet rocks in vibrant hues, we knew one thing for the weight of that final encounter with the Watcher hung heavy over us like storm clouds. College life, a fresh start miles away from Blue Springs, felt less like a new beginning and more like a desperate attempt to outrun a chilling premonition. We clung to the hope that the creature's words, "Perhaps next time," were a concession, a begrudging acceptance of its temporary defeat. Chicago, with its bustling streets and towering skyscrapers, offered a stark contrast to the sleepy serenity of Blue Springs. Yet, even amidst the constant hum of urban life, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a paranoia that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. Every flicker of light in a dark alley, every rustling in the crowded park, sent shivers down my spine. "You're jumpier than a startled cat," John remarked one evening, catching me flinch at a loud car backfire. I can't help it, I confess, my voice laced with frustration. The whole experience, it's hard to shake. John squeezed my shoulder in a reassuring gesture. "Yeah, I get it. But that thing is gone. Remember the storm? We won. We banished it." A flicker of doubt still flickered in my eyes. Or so we think, I mumbled. The unease continued, a shadow clinging to me even in the well-lit security of our dorm room. One night, after a particularly unsettling dream filled with malevolent whispers and glowing eyes, I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding like a drum solo. John stirred beside me, his voice thick with sleep. "What's wrong?" he mumbled. "Another nightmare," I sighed, collapsing back onto the pillow. "About? You know who?" "Yeah," I whispered, the memory sending chills down my spine. This time it felt different. In the dream, the Watcher wasn't a terrifying monster, but a disembodied voice, smooth and persuasive, offering me power beyond comprehension. It spoke of worlds unseen, of untapped potential, of a chance to be more than just human. "It's trying to get to you," John stated, his voice laced with concern. "Get into your head. Don't listen to it." But the insidious seed of doubt had been planted. The memory of the creature's amusement, the hint of recognition in its final words, gnawed at me. Was it truly banished, or was it simply biding its time, playing a deeper, more subtle game? Sleep became a battleground, filled with disturbing dreams and unsettling whispers. The library, once a haven of knowledge, now appeared tainted, the ancient texts filled with cryptic symbols that seemed to mock me. My studies suffered, replaced by a consuming fear that I was losing control. "I can't keep going like this," I confessed to John, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to find out what it wants." John's face paled. "Are you crazy? You almost died back there. Don't even think about it." But the thought was already taking root in my mind. Perhaps understanding the Watcher, its motives, was the only way to truly banish it, or at least to know when it would return. It was a desperate gamble, fueled by a growing sense of helplessness. "I have to try," I insisted, the conviction in my voice surprising even myself. "There has to be another way." John's eyes held a mixture of fear and reluctant acceptance. "Then we do it together," he said finally. "But be careful. This could be a very bad idea." A knot of dread formed in my stomach, but a spark of determination flickered as well. The shadows were still out there, lurking in the corners of my mind. We might have won the first round, but the battle with the Watcher, it seemed, was far from over. Venturing back into the forbidden section of the Blue Springs library felt like diving into a pool of stagnant water, unsettling and strangely familiar. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the smell of dust and mildew laced with something metallic, almost acrid. We scavenged through grimoires, deciphering cryptic symbols and obscure rituals. Sleepless nights blurred into feverish research, the line between reality and chilling premonitions growing increasingly thin. "This is a mistake," John mumbled one evening, his eyes red-rimmed from fatigue. "These aren't answers. They're just doorways to more darkness." "We have to keep looking," I countered, my voice hoarse. "There has to be something in these books about communicating with interdimensional entities." The very phrase sent a shiver down my spine, but the fear was laced with a desperate hope. Maybe understanding the Watcher, its motivations, was the key to truly banishing it, or at least to know when it would return. Days blurred into weeks, and a sense of frustration gnawed at us. The ancient texts offered more warnings than explanations, cryptic symbols hinting at the dangers of tampering with forces beyond human comprehension. Yet we persevered, fueled by a shared determination and a gnawing sense of dread. Finally, John slammed a dusty tome shut, a triumphant glint in his eyes. "There, a summoning ritual, but it's incomplete." He pointed to a faded inscription, half devoured by time. The remaining lines spoke of specific offerings, sacrifices to appease the summoned entity. Offerings? I whispered, a cold fear settling in my stomach. What kind of offerings? John skimmed the page, his face grim. Rare metals, something personal, and a piece of the barrier between worlds. My heart hammered against my ribs. A piece of the barrier? You mean the obsidian? He nodded silently. A wave of nausea washed over me. The obsidian, imbued with moonlight during the eclipse, was the key to the ritual that supposedly banished the Watcher. How could we use the same object to summon it again? The very idea seemed a dangerous paradox, a recipe for disaster. It's a gamble, John admitted, his voice laced with trepidation. But maybe if we understand its intentions, its weaknesses, we can find a way to banish it for good this time. The risk was undeniable, but the alternative, living under the constant threat of the Watcher's return, its whispers filling my dreams, felt even worse. All right, I said, my voice trembling slightly. We do it. But this time, we have to be ready. We need a plan B, an emergency escape route. John nodded, the grim determination in his eyes mirroring my own. The library, once a refuge, now felt like a battleground. We were about to delve deeper into the shadows, hoping to find an answer that might very well lead us further into the darkness. As we delved into the complexities of the ritual, a chilling realization dawned on me. There was no guarantee that the Watcher would play by the rules. The gamble we were taking wasn't just about understanding the creature. It was about facing it once again, this time on its own terms. We returned to the desolate cliff, face under the cloak of a starless night. The wind howled a mournful song, echoing the trepidation in my heart. The once familiar location now seemed alien, fraught with unseen danger. Are you sure about this? John asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. Hesitation gnawed at me, but there was no turning back. The whispers in my dreams had intensified, the Watcher's presence growing bolder. This was a desperate gamble, but it was our only hope. We have to be, I replied, my voice laced with a conviction I didn't entirely feel. We set up the ritual site, the obsidian rock face gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The remaining inscription flickered on the page, a chilling reminder of the price we were about to pay. An offering of a rare metal shard, a worn childhood toy that held a lifetime of memories, and finally, a piece of the obsidian itself, a shard chipped from the very rock face that had been the key to our supposed victory. As I placed the final offering, a sense of foreboding settled over the landscape. The wind died down, an unnatural stillness descending upon us. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, the cave mouth behind the rock face pulsating with an ominous light. Ready? John's voice trembled slightly. As ready as I'll ever be, I muttered, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. With a deep breath, I chanted the ancient incantation, the words unfamiliar yet strangely compelling, a siren song leading us into the abyss. The cave entrance erupted in a vortex of shadows, swirling and coalescing into the familiar form of the Watcher. This time, however, its demeanor seemed different. There was a flicker of curiosity in its glowing yellow eyes, a hint of amusement at our audacity. Foolish mortals, its voice rasped, echoing across the wind-swept cliff face. Do you truly believe you can control the forces you have unleashed? We want to understand, I countered, my voice surprisingly steady. Why are you here? What do you want? The Watcher tilted its head, a chilling sensation of amusement, emanating from its form. Understanding is not for your kind, it hissed. But Perhaps you can be useful. A pawn in a larger game. Panic clawed at my throat. A pawn? What did it mean? Before I could respond, the ground trembled violently. The air shimmered, and a new figure emerged from the shadows. Another creature, taller and even more terrifying than the Watcher. Its eyes cold and devoid of emotion, locked onto me. This one, the new creature rasped, its voice like grinding stone. This one has potential. The Watcher chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Indeed, perhaps a partnership can be arranged. Understanding dawned on me, a chilling realization that sent my heart plummeting. We hadn't summoned the Watcher to understand it. We had just unwittingly drawn the attention of a far greater evil, and in doing so become entangled in a cosmic power struggle beyond our comprehension. John, I gasped, my voice trembling. We need to get out of here. Now. The Watcher let out a cackle, the sound echoing across the desolate landscape. We had opened a door we could never fully close, and the true battle, it seemed, was only just beginning. Adrenaline surged through me, replacing terror with a desperate need to escape. The cliff face, once a terrifying obstacle, became our only hope. We scrambled towards the rope John had secured days ago, the ground shaking beneath our feet as the monstrous figures converged on the cave opening. They're going to follow us, I yelled over the howling wind, already halfway up the treacherous climb. They can't climb as fast as we can, John replied, his voice strained with exertion. Just keep going. But the relief was short-lived. A tendril of shadow, inky black and malevolent, shot out from the cave mouth, wrapping itself around John's ankle. He let out a cry of pain, his ascent faltering. Panic surged through me. I couldn't leave him. But if we didn't reach the top soon, we were both doomed. Go, John shouted, his voice laced with urgency. I can hold them off for a moment. No way. I roared back, digging my heels into the rock face, defying the screaming muscles in my legs. I reached down, grabbing a jagged piece of rock, and with a surge of adrenaline, severed the shadow tendril just above John's ankle. He scrambled onward, the creature's frustrated screech echoing behind us. But we were far from safe. The shadows writhed at the cave entrance, sending chills down my spine. This wasn't a fight we could win with makeshift weapons and sheer willpower. We need a diversion, I yelled, glancing around frantically. My eyes landed on a loose boulder precariously balanced on the edge of the cliff. An idea, desperate and dangerous, sparked in my mind. John, look up, I screamed, pointing at the boulder. Understanding flickered in his eyes. With a combined push, we sent the boulder tumbling down the cliff face. It crashed against the cave entrance, sending rocks and debris flying, momentarily blocking the passage. The sound of the creature's enraged roars filled the air. That won't hold them for long, John said, his breath ragged. We continued our desperate climb, the wind whipping at our faces, the taste of salt and fear on our lips. Reaching the top, we collapsed on the rain-soaked grass, chests heaving, lungs burning. The storm that had been brewing on the horizon finally broke. Rain lashed down, momentarily obscuring the cliff face below. Despite the physical exhaustion, a sliver of hope flickered within me. Maybe, just maybe, the storm and the landslide would buy us enough time to escape. We need to get out of here, John said, pulling himself up and grabbing his bag. Head back to the car. We can't stay here. We stumbled through the downpour, the memory of those monstrous figures driving us forward. Every shadow, every rustling in the trees sent shivers down my spine. The world seemed different now, tinged with a darkness we could never truly ignore. Reaching the car, we piled in, soaked to the bone and shivering uncontrollably. John started the engine, and we peeled away from the desolate landscape, leaving the echoes of the creature's rage behind. As we drove away, the storm raging outside mirroring the tempest within me, one question hung heavy in the air. We had escaped the cliff face, but had we truly escaped the darkness we had unleashed? The line between victory and a temporary reprieve had blurred once again, and the terrifying truth was clear. This fight was far from over. The creatures, and the threat they posed, had only just begun to unfold.